The emergency session of the Galactic Council had never seen such panic before. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive circular chamber, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Veltar, his tall crystalline body flickering with the deep purple patterns that indicated extreme distress among his people. "The HFY swarm has consumed the Outer Rim colonies," Veltar announced, his voice carrying the weight of billions of lost lives. 17 star systems in 6 months. Our combined fleets cannot stop them. The holographic display above the chamber showed the terrifying reality. Red zones spread across the galactic, map like a disease, marking systems that no longer responded to communications. The HFY bioships moved in perfect coordination, their living hulls adapting to every weapon the Council forces threw at them. Energy beams that worked one day were useless the next as the creatures developed reflective scales. Kinetic weapons that penetrated their armor 1 week were stopped by hardening compounds. The following week, General Dexmora of the Draknari Republic slammed his 6-armed form against his seat. "We have thrown everything at them. Our best weapons, our finest warriors, our most advanced technologies. They adapt faster than we can innovate." The Xanthari military advisor brought up tactical reports that made the situation even more grim. Their reproduction rate is increasing. Each system they consume provides more biomass for new ships. At current expansion rates, they will reach the core worlds within 2 years. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The Galactic Council had faced threats before, but nothing like this. The HFY were not just another hostile species seeking territory or resources. They were a living weapon that grew stronger with each victory, learning from every encounter and becoming more deadly with each passing day. Commander Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force sat in the small section reserved for provisional members. Humanity had been granted limited membership only 5 years ago, mostly as a gesture of goodwill toward the enthusiastic newcomers from Earth. Most council members viewed humans as primitive but harmless, a young species that might contribute raw materials and curiosity to the galactic community. Jake watched the proceedings with growing interest. The aliens spoke of adaptation and evolution as if these were impossible challenges to overcome. They treated the HFY's biological advantages as insurmountable obstacles. But something about their approach seemed fundamentally wrong to him. When the session broke for emergency consultations, Jake activated his secure communication link to Earth. The message traveled through subspace relays, crossing the vast distance to reach Admiral Kate Sullivan at Terran Defense Command. "Admiral, the Council is requesting assistance against something called the HFY swarm," Jake reported. "They're asking for our unique perspective on warfare." Admiral Sullivan's weathered face appeared on the screen, showing the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her in months. Her gray hair was pulled back in the regulation style, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of Earth's most respected military leaders. "Unique perspective, they say," she replied. "Commander, patch me through to Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Blake. His asymmetric warfare doctrine might be exactly what we need." Within minutes, Blake was on the line from the Pentagon. His report on unconventional military strategies had been gathering dust in filing systems, considered too radical for implementation against human enemies. But the HFY were not human enemies. "The aliens are fighting a traditional war against an adaptive enemy," Blake explained. "They're trying to out-evolve a species that has evolution as its primary weapon. That's like trying to outswim a fish." Admiral Sullivan nodded slowly. "What do you recommend?" "We don't fight their strength. We fight their weakness. Every biological system has limitations. Every adaptive mechanism has blind spots. The question is whether the Council is ready for the kind of warfare humans specialize in." The Admiral's expression grew serious. "Get me General Patricia Hayes on Priority Channel, and send a message to President Collins. Tell him the galaxy just asked humanity to do what we do best." The response from Earth was swift and decisive. President Andrew Collins, a former military officer himself, understood the implications immediately. The Galactic Council had spent centuries developing honorable rules of engagement, fighting wars with clear objectives and minimal casualties. They had never faced an enemy that required total war. Authorize full military cooperation, Collins ordered. Deploy the 1st Expeditionary Force and activate the Strategic Advisory Group. If the Council wants our help, they're going to get it within hours. The first human strategic advisors were boarding fast courier ships bound for Alpha Centauri Station. Dr. Lisa Morgan, humanity's leading expert on biological warfare, packed her research on adaptive organisms. Colonel Steve Parker gathered his files on psychological operations. Major Kelly Barnes loaded her equipment for deep reconnaissance missions, but the most important passenger was General Marcus Webb, carrying a briefcase full of human military history. Inside were detailed analyses of every major conflict humanity had fought, from ancient battles to modern warfare. The documents contained strategies that had never been shared with alien species, tactics that the Galactic Council would find either brilliant or horrifying. As the human ships departed Earth's orbital stations, Admiral Sullivan sent a final message to Commander Morrison. Jake, prepare the Council for what they're about to see. We're not sending advisors. We're sending warriors who have turned warfare into an art form. The message reached Jake as he sat in his quarters aboard the Council station. Around him, alien representatives continued their emergency sessions, debating defensive strategies and evacuation plans. They had no idea that humanity was about to introduce them to concepts they had never imagined. Jake looked out at the stars, knowing that everything was about to change. The Galactic Council had asked for help against an adaptive enemy. They were about to learn that humans were the most adaptive species of all, not biologically, but strategically. And when humans adapted to war, they didn't just survive. They won. The human strategic advisors arrived at Alpha Centauri Station within 48 hours of the emergency session. Dr. Lisa Morgan stepped off the transport ship carrying 3 cases of biological research data and a grim expression. She had spent the entire journey studying the Kethver specimens that Council forces had managed to recover from destroyed bioships. The Council's war room was a marvel of alien technology, with holographic displays showing real-time battle data from across the galaxy. Xanthari crystalline interfaces hummed with energy while Draknari tactical computers processed millions of calculations per second. The assembled alien commanders watched as red zones continued to spread across the galactic map, marking systems that had fallen to the Kethver advance. General Marcus Webb entered the chamber and immediately drew stares from the alien officers. His simple cloth uniform looked primitive compared to their advanced armor and technological implants, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had studied warfare for 30 years. "Show me everything you know about the enemy," Webb said without preamble. The holographic displays shifted to show Kethver bioships in action. The creatures moved with fluid grace through space, their living hulls pulsing with organic energy. When Council forces fired energy weapons, the bioships developed reflective scales within hours. When kinetic projectiles were used, hardening compounds appeared on their surfaces. The adaptation was so rapid that no weapon remained effective for more than a few engagements. "They are perfect biological weapons," explained Colonel Kexrun, the Xanthari military advisor. "Evolution guided by intelligence. They learn from every attack and become immune to it." Dr. Morgan studied the biological data with growing interest. Her fingers traced the molecular structures displayed on the screens, noting the complex protein chains that allowed rapid adaptation. "They're impressive," she admitted. "But they're still biological organisms. Biology has rules." "What kind of rules?" asked General Dexmora, his 6 arms gesturing impatiently. "Every biological system has energy costs," Morgan replied. "Adaptation requires resources. The faster they adapt, the more energy they consume, and every adaptation creates new vulnerabilities." Captain Nina Torres, Webb's tactical aide, began uploading human military databases to the Council systems. The alien computers struggled to process the information. Not because of technological limitations, but because of the sheer volume of human warfare data. Your species has been fighting for 10,000 years, observed Colonel Kexrun, his crystalline form flickering with confusion. These records show continuous conflict across your entire history. Wars against other humans, Webb confirmed. We faced every possible military challenge. Enemies who adapted to our tactics, who learned our strategies, who matched our technologies. We didn't just survive those conflicts, we won them. The holographic displays began showing human military history. The siege of Leningrad, where an entire city survived starvation through pure determination. The Tet Offensive, where apparent defeat became strategic victory. Sherman's march to the sea, where total warfare broke an enemy's will to fight. The alien commanders watched in growing horror as human conflicts played out before them. Cities burned while armies moved through civilian populations. Entire economies were destroyed to deny resources to enemies. Psychological warfare broke the spirit of opposing forces long before physical defeat. These are your own people fighting. Each other, Colonel Kexrun said, his voice carrying notes of disgust. Why would you show us this? Because you asked us to fight an enemy that adapts to weapons? Replied Colonel Steve Parker, who had just arrived with his psychological operations team. We're the species that turned warfare into science. We don't just adapt to enemies. We create new forms of warfare faster than they can evolve. The implications began to sink in among the alien commanders. They had been fighting the Kethver with traditional military doctrine, treating the conflict as a series of battles to be won or lost. But humans viewed warfare as something much more comprehensive. Admiral Kate Sullivan's voice crackled through the communication system from Earth. General Webb, the Joint Chiefs have approved Operation Chimera. We're deploying the 1st Expeditionary Force and the Strategic Advisory Group. What's our timeline? The room fell silent. The Galactic Council had expected perhaps a few thousand advisors and some innovative weapons. They had not expected humanity to mobilize for total war. Admiral, we need 6 weeks to gather intelligence and position our forces, Webb replied. But we can begin preliminary operations immediately. Preliminary operations? Asked General Lexmara. What does that mean? Major Kelly Barnes stepped forward, her combat gear a stark contrast to the alien officers' ceremonial uniforms. It means we start fighting the war while you're still planning the battles. Intelligence gathering, disruption of enemy supply lines, psychological operations against their command structure. Dr. Morgan pulled up biological analysis charts on the displays. The Kethver adapt to direct threats, but they're still vulnerable to environmental factors. Toxins in their food supply, electromagnetic interference with their nervous systems, biological agents that target their adaptation mechanisms. You're talking about biological warfare, said Colonel Kexrun, his form flickering with alarm colors. We're talking about winning, Webb replied bluntly. You asked for our help against an enemy that's consuming the galaxy. We're going to stop them using every method at our disposal. The alien commanders exchanged glances that their translators couldn't interpret. They had invited humanity to join their war, but they were beginning to realize that humans didn't join wars, they fought them. The first wave of human ships will arrive at the front lines within 72 hours, Admiral Sullivan announced. Admiral Bobby Chun is commanding 5 battle groups with full authorization for independent operations. 5 battle groups? General Lexmara asked. How many ships is that? 300 vessels, Sullivan replied. But don't expect them to fight like your fleets. They're going to fight like humans. Colonel Parker began outlining the human approach to warfare. We don't just attack the enemy's military forces. We attack their logistics, their communication, their morale, their ability to coordinate. We make them fight our kind of war instead of their kind of war. The holographic displays showed human ship formations spreading across multiple star systems. Instead of concentrating forces for decisive battles, they were dispersing into small, independent units that could strike anywhere and disappear. This is not how wars are fought, protested Colonel Kexrun. Where are your battle lines? Your defensive positions? We don't fight wars, Webb replied. We win them. There's a difference. As the human advisors continued their briefing, the alien commanders began to understand that they had not just requested help. They had unleashed something that would change the nature of warfare in the galaxy forever. The Kethver swarm had adapted to fight Council forces, but they had never faced an enemy that treated adaptation itself as just another weapon to be countered. The war was about to begin, and humanity was going to fight it their way. The first wave of human ships arrived at the front lines of the Kethver advance 3 days ahead of schedule. Admiral Bobby Chun commanded the fleet from the carrier USS Vengeance, a massive vessel that dwarfed most Council warships. But the human fleet was smaller than the alien commanders had expected. Only 300 vessels compared to the thousands that remained in the Council's defensive formations. The Kethver swarm was currently besieging Nexus Prime, an industrial world that produced starship components for half the galaxy. The planet's orbital defenses had held for 2 weeks, but the bioships were adapting to the defensive systems faster than the engineers could modify them. Energy barriers that had stopped the first wave were now useless against creatures that had developed absorption organs. Admiral Chun studied the tactical displays from his command bridge. Captain Amy Rodriguez, his intelligence officer, stood beside him analyzing the Kethver attack patterns. The bioships moved in perfect coordination, their living hulls pulsing with organic energy as they pressed against the planet's defenses. They're following standard biological imperative, Rodriguez observed. Attack the strongest defensive position first, adapt to overcome it, then move to the next target? Which makes them predictable, Chun replied. Signal the fleet. Execute. Protocol 7. The human ships began to scatter across a volume of space larger than most solar systems. Council observers watched in confusion as the tight formation broke apart into dozens of smaller groups. Some ships headed toward the outer system, others moved toward nearby asteroid fields, and a few simply disappeared into the void. This is cowardice, snarled General Vexmora from his command ship. They run from the first sign of battle. But Colonel Kexrun, who had been studying human military doctrine for the past week, saw something different. They're not retreating. They're repositioning. Look at the dispersal pattern. The human ships had spread across such a vast area that the Kethver could not engage them all effectively. The bioships, programmed to attack the strongest opposition, found themselves confused by an enemy that refused to present a unified target. Then the real surprise began. Instead of attacking the Kethver directly, the human forces began targeting everything except the bioships themselves. Lieutenant Commander Paul Mitchell led a squadron of destroyers toward the asteroid mining operations that fed the swarm. His ship, the USS Relentless, carried a cargo that would have horrified the Council if they had known about it. Target the primary mining facility, Mitchell ordered. Deploy the isotope charges. The human warships began bombarding the asteroid miners with weapons that contained radioactive isotopes. They didn't try to destroy the mining ships, which would have been impossible given the Kethver's adaptive defenses. Instead, they contaminated the raw materials that the bioships consumed for energy. The Kethver adapt to direct weapons, Mitchell explained to his alien liaison, a nervous Xanthari engineer named Kelter. But they don't adapt to environmental toxins in their food supply. Their own biology becomes their weakness. Across the system, other human units were implementing equally unconventional strategies. Major Kelly Barnes led Marine boarding parties and captured Council shuttles, approaching disabled Kethver scout ships that had been damaged in earlier battles. But instead of trying to destroy the bioships, the Marines planted sophisticated listening devices and tracking beacons before withdrawing. We're not here to fight them, Barnes explained to her team as they prepared for another insertion. We're here to learn how they communicate, how they coordinate, how they think. The Kethver, following their biological programming, repaired the damaged scout ships and sent them back to the fleet. Within hours, the Human Intelligence Network had mapped the entire swarm's communication system. Every bioship was transmitting location data directly to human monitoring stations. Colonel, Danny Foster's engineering corps took the most unusual approach of all. His ships began constructing massive electromagnetic pulse generators in the outer system, far from the main battle. The devices looked like civilian power stations, harmless and easy to ignore. "What are those things?" asked Captain Rodriguez, as she monitored the construction from the Vengeance. "Interference generators," Foster replied over the communication link. "The Kethver coordinate through biological radio signals. We're going to jam their entire network." The electromagnetic pulse generators came online simultaneously across multiple star systems. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Kethver bioships, which had moved in perfect coordination for months, suddenly began attacking each other. Their biological programming could not distinguish between legitimate targets and their own forces when their communication network was disrupted. Council forces watched in amazement as the seemingly invincible swarm turned on itself. Bioships that had adapted to every weapon thrown at them were now being destroyed by their own kind. The perfect biological coordination that had made them unstoppable became their greatest weakness. "How is this possible?" asked General Dexmora, his 6 arms gesturing frantically at the tactical displays. "Simple," replied Admiral Chun. "We didn't fight their adaptation. We fought their coordination. A perfect biological weapon is only perfect if it knows what to attack, but the human strategy was just beginning. While the Kethver forces were dealing with internal chaos, human infiltration teams were gathering intelligence on the swarm's command structure. The bioships might be individually powerful, but they were still controlled by queen organisms that directed their actions. Captain Nina Torres coordinated the intelligence gathering from her position aboard the USS Vengeance. "We're getting biological signatures from 17 different queen organisms. They're using quantum entanglement for long-range communication." "Can we disrupt that too?" asked Admiral Chun. "Not disrupt," Torres replied with a smile. "Hijack. If we can access their quantum communication network, we can send our own orders to the bioships." The plan was audacious even by human standards. Instead of trying to destroy the Kethver command structure, they would take control of it. The bioships would receive orders that seemed to come from their own queens, but would actually be coming from human commanders. Dr. Lisa Morgan, working from her mobile laboratory, had been studying the biological samples captured during the boarding operations. "Their command structure is based on pheromone recognition," she reported. "If we can synthesize the right chemical signals, we can make them think we're their superiors." The first test came when human forces captured a damaged Kethver bioship and began broadcasting synthesized pheromone signals. The creature's response was immediate and complete. It began following human orders as if they were coming from its own queen. "This is beyond warfare," observed Colonel Kexrun as he watched the proceedings. "You're turning their own biology against them." "We're fighting smart instead of hard," replied Colonel Steve Parker, who had been coordinating the psychological operations. The Kethver are perfect biological weapons, but they're still just weapons. And weapons can be controlled by whoever understands how to use them. The Council forces began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just defeating the Kethver. They were turning the swarm into their own weapon, using the enemy's greatest strength against itself. As the battle for Nexus Prime continued, the Kethver bioships found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The perfect adaptation that had made them unstoppable was becoming useless against opponents who changed the rules of engagement faster than biological evolution could respond. The war was entering a new phase, and humanity was just getting started. The Kethver response to human tactics came faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks of the electromagnetic interference campaign, the bioships had developed new sensory organs that could penetrate the jamming signals. Their coordination returned as they adapted specialized communication methods that bypassed the human interference completely. Dr. Lisa Morgan watched the adaptation process from her laboratory ship with professional fascination. The bioships were literally growing. New organs in real time, reshaping their internal structure to overcome the obstacles that human forces had created. "Their evolution rate is incredible," she reported to Admiral Chun. "They're adapting faster than we initially calculated." The contaminated asteroid mining operations had also become ineffective. The Kethver queens had produced specialized filtering organisms that could process the radioactive isotopes without harm to the bioships. What had been a devastating weakness just days earlier was now completely neutralized. "They're learning from every trick we throw at them," observed Captain Amy Rodriguez as she studied the intelligence reports. "Their biological programming is more sophisticated than we thought." But General Marcus Webb, monitoring the situation from Alpha Centauri Station, was not concerned. He had been expecting this development. "Phase 1 was never meant to be permanent," he explained to the worried Council commanders. "We were testing their adaptation limits and gathering data on their response patterns." The human strategy had always been designed in multiple phases. While the aliens focused on the tactical victories and defeats, the human commanders were thinking several moves ahead. Every adaptation the Kethver made gave the humans more information about their biological limitations. Colonel Steve Parker began implementing Phase 2 of the psychological warfare campaign. "The Kethver have adapted to our electronic interference," he announced to his team, "but they haven't adapted to misinformation." The human forces began broadcasting false retreat orders using the captured Kethver communication frequencies. The bioships, having learned to ignore obvious deception attempts, analyzed the signals and determined they were fake. Following their improved programming, they ignored the false orders and pressed their attack deeper into Council space. This was exactly what the humans wanted. The false retreat orders were actually real battle plans disguised as obvious fakes. The Kethver, expecting deception, had been programmed to do the opposite of what they thought the humans wanted. But the humans had anticipated this reaction and were using reverse psychology on a galactic scale. Captain Tony Sanders commanded the mining vessel Prometheus, which had been retrofitted with cargo that would have terrified the Council if they had known its true nature. As the Kethver fleet pushed deeper into the nebula sector, following what they believed was a successful counterattack, his ship and 50 others released millions of small capsules into space. The capsules looked like ordinary space debris, harmless chunks of metal and ceramic that posed no obvious threat. The Kethver bioships, focused on pursuing what they thought were retreating human forces, passed through the debris fields without paying attention to the harmless-looking objects. "Deployment complete," Sanders reported to Admiral Chun. "Package delivery successful across all target zones." Dr. Morgan monitored the results from her laboratory, watching biological sensors that tracked the capsule's progress. Each capsule contained engineered bacteria specifically designed to feed on the proteins that made up Kethver bioship hulls. But these were not ordinary biological weapons. "The bacteria are programmed with a 72-hour delay," Morgan explained to her research team. "They'll remain completely dormant until the activation signal. Then they'll all become active simultaneously across the entire enemy fleet." The delay was crucial to the human plan. The Kethver adaptation process required time to analyze threats and develop countermeasures. By remaining dormant, the bacteria would be inside the bioships for 3 full days before the swarm's immune systems even detected their presence. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Green coordinated the information warfare campaign from her command center aboard the USS Vengeance. Her team had been studying Kethver communication patterns and had discovered something interesting about their decision-making process. "The bioships follow a hierarchical command structure," Green reported. "Lower-level organisms defer to higher-level ones automatically. If we can convince them that we outrank their current commanders, they'll follow our orders instead." The human infiltration teams had captured enough Kethver biological material to synthesize the pheromone signals that indicated command authority. More importantly, they had learned to broadcast these signals using quantum entanglement, making them indistinguishable from legitimate orders from Kethver Queens. Major Kelly Barnes led the final infiltration mission against a damaged Kethver command ship. Her team's objective was not to destroy the vessel, but to plant a quantum communication device that would give humans direct access to the swarm's command network. "Remember, we're not here to fight," Barnes told her Marines as they prepared for insertion. "We're here to become part of their command structure." The mission was successful beyond expectations. The quantum communicator integrated seamlessly with the HFY system, appearing to be a natural part of their biological network. Human commanders could now send orders directly to individual bioships without the HFY queens detecting the intrusion. The 72-hour countdown reached zero while the HFY forces were scattered across multiple star systems, pursuing what they believed were retreating human fleets. The bacterial weapons activated simultaneously in thousands of bioships, beginning to dissolve their hulls from the inside. But the bacteria were designed to do more than just damage the ships. As the HFY immune systems activated to fight the infection, they triggered a secondary response that weakened the bioship's structural integrity. The creature's own defensive mechanisms made them vulnerable to conventional weapons. Admiral Jen watched the tactical displays as HFY bioships began sending distress signals across their network. "Phase 2 is complete," he announced. "All units, prepare for Phase 3. The human fleet, which had been scattered across dozens of star systems, began converging on the weakened HFY forces, but they were not attacking randomly. Using the intelligence gathered from the infiltration missions, they targeted specific bioships that served as communication relays for the swarm. "We're not trying to destroy their entire fleet," explained Captain Rodriguez as she coordinated the attacks. "We're cutting their communication lines and isolating individual groups." The HFY queens, dealing with simultaneous bacterial infections and communication disruptions, began making desperate decisions. They ordered their bioships to retreat to defensive positions, not knowing that human forces were already intercepting and modifying those orders. Bioships that received retreat orders found themselves being directed into human ambush zones. Others were ordered to act positions that turned out to be their own forces. The perfect coordination that had made the swarm unstoppable was being turned into a weapon against itself. Colonel Danny Foster's engineering teams activated hidden devices that had been planted throughout the affected star systems. These were not weapons in any traditional sense, but rather signal boosters that amplified the fake command signals being broadcast to the HFY fleet. "The bioships can't tell the difference between real and fake orders anymore," Foster reported. "Their command structure is completely compromised." Dr. Morgan observed the biological chaos from her laboratory with scientific detachment. "They're trying to adapt to multiple threats simultaneously," she noted. "But their adaptation process requires energy and resources. They're overloading their own evolutionary mechanisms." The HFY swarm, which had seemed unstoppable just weeks earlier, was now fighting a war on multiple fronts against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every response. Their greatest strength was becoming their greatest weakness as human forces continued to escalate their unconventional warfare campaign. The galaxy was about to learn that humans did not just fight wars. They redefined what warfare meant. The second wave of human ships arrived not as a traditional fleet, but as individual vessels scattered across 50 different star systems. Each ship carried a crew of specialists who had spent months studying every aspect of HFY biology and behavior. These were not regular military units, but rather teams of scientists, engineers, and soldiers trained for missions that the Galactic Council would have considered impossible. Captain Ben Clark commanded the USS Retribution, a modified research vessel that carried the most dangerous cargo in human space. Deep in the ship's medical bay, Sergeant Jim Walsh lay in a specialized containment unit, his body deliberately infected with a modified version of the bacterial weapon that had been used against the HFY fleet. "Sir, the medical readings are stable," reported Commander Helen Davis, Clark's executive officer, "but I still think this plan is insane." "Sergeant Walsh volunteered," Clark replied, studying the biological monitors that tracked the infection's progress. "He knows what we're asking of him." The plan was audacious even by human standards. The infected volunteer would be captured, by the Kethver, who would study the bacteria to develop better defenses against human biological warfare. But the bacteria in Walsh's system had been engineered to look like an accidental infection while actually carrying something far more dangerous. Dr. Lisa Morgan had spent weeks designing the weapon hidden within the apparent bacterial infection. The carrier organism looks exactly like our previous biological weapon, she explained to the mission team. But it's actually a delivery system for a virus that targets the Kethver-S adaptive immune system. The virus was designed to remain completely undetectable until the Kethver-S own immune system tried to develop antibodies against the bacterial infection. When their adaptation process began, the virus would activate and begin systematically, destroying their ability to evolve new defenses. Sergeant Walsh understood the risks better than anyone. The infection was real, and without constant medical treatment, it would kill him within days. But his sacrifice could cripple the Kethver-S greatest advantage and give humanity the opening they needed to end the war. "Deploy the bait, Captain," Clark ordered as they approached the Kethver Patrol Zone. The USS Retribution simulated battle damage and began broadcasting distress signals. The nearby Kethver bioships, following their programming to capture useful specimens, approached the apparently crippled human vessel. Clark's crew put up enough resistance to seem genuine before allowing themselves to be captured. Walsh was taken to a Kethver biolaboratory for study, exactly as the humans had planned. The alien scientists began analyzing his infection, trying to understand how humans had developed such effective biological weapons. They extracted tissue samples and blood specimens, unknowingly spreading the hidden virus throughout their research facility. Meanwhile, Colonel Frank Miller's contingent had been preparing for a completely different approach to ending the war. Using the intelligence gathered from months of infiltration missions, they had located the Kethver-S Central Hive Complex, a massive bioconstruct hidden in the outer rim that served as both command center and breeding facility for the entire swarm. "If we can't kill them all," Miller explained to his strike team, "we make them kill each other." The human commandos didn't try to destroy the hive complex, which would have been impossible given its size and defenses. Instead, they infiltrated the massive structure and began reprogramming the biological control systems that coordinated the swarm's activities. The Kethver command network was based on quantum entangled biological computers that could process millions of variables simultaneously. But the humans had learned to access these systems during their previous infiltration missions and had developed methods to introduce false data into the network. Captain Nina Torres coordinated the infiltration from her mobile command center. "The biological computers are accepting our modified programming," she reported. "The Hive thinks it's receiving legitimate updates to swarm coordination protocols." The reprogramming was subtle and complex. Instead of obviously hostile commands that would be detected and rejected, the humans introduced small errors into the coordination algorithms. Bioships would receive navigation data that was off by a few degrees or target identification signals that were slightly corrupted. The effect was gradual but devastating. Kethver forces across the galaxy began making small mistakes that accumulated into major coordination failures. Ships that should have been attacking human positions found themselves firing on empty space. Others received orders to attack targets that turned out to be their own support vessels. Dr. Morgan monitored the virus spread from her laboratory ship as Kethver research facilities unknowingly transmitted the infection to bioships throughout their network. "The virus is replicating faster than we expected," she reported. "Their own communication system is carrying it to every major hive complex." The Kethver adaptation process, which had been their greatest strength, was now working against them. Each time they tried to develop immunity to the virus, it evolved to counter their defenses. But unlike their normal rapid adaptation, this process was draining enormous amounts of energy from their bio-ships. Major Kelly Barnes led a series of psychological warfare operations designed to exploit the growing chaos in the Kethver ranks. Her teams began broadcasting fake emergency signals that mimicked the distress calls of Kethver queens, causing bioships to abandon their positions to respond to non-existent threats. "They're programmed to protect their queens above all else," Barnes explained to her team. If they think their command structure is under attack, they'll ignore everything else to respond. The fake distress signals worked perfectly. Entire Kethver. Battle groups abandoned strategic positions to rush to the aid of queens that were never actually in danger. Human forces moved quickly to occupy the abandoned territory, cutting off supply lines and isolating Kethver forces into smaller, more manageable groups. Admiral Bobby Chun coordinated the final phase of the operation from the USS Vengeance. The scattered human forces began converging on the isolated Kethver groups, but they were not planning traditional battles. Instead, they implemented containment strategies designed to prevent the bioships from coordinating their defenses. We're not trying to destroy them, Chun explained to the Council observers. We're turning them into individual threats instead of a coordinated swarm. The virus continued to spread through the Kethver network, carried by their own communication systems and research protocols. Bioships that had been perfectly adapted to human weapons found their immune systems failing as the virus destroyed their ability to evolve new defenses. Colonel Steve Parker's information warfare teams intercepted increasingly desperate communications from Kethver queens trying to coordinate a response to the biological attack. But their own corrupted command systems were feeding them false information about the scope and nature of the threat. They don't understand what's happening to them, Parker reported. Their queens are receiving reports that contradict each other. Some say the virus is contained, others say it's spreading uncontrollably. The confusion in the Kethver command structure created opportunities for even more human infiltration. Teams led by Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Green began impersonating Kethver commanders, using synthesized pheromone signals to issue contradictory orders to confused bio-ships. As the viral weapon continued its work, the Kethver's adaptive capabilities began shutting down across their entire network. Bioships that had evolved to counter human weapons found themselves vulnerable to attacks they had already learned to resist. Their biological programming, corrupted by the virus, began producing random mutations instead of useful adaptations. The war was entering its final phase, and the Kethver swarm was discovering that their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. The humans had not just defeated their adaptation process, they had turned it into a weapon against the swarm itself. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come as the full scope of human strategic planning became clear to both allies and enemies across the galaxy. The war ended not with a massive final battle, but with the slow collapse of the Kethver swarm's ability to function as a unified force. Across the galaxy, bioships that had once moved in perfect coordination now drifted aimlessly through space, their command systems corrupted beyond repair. The virus had spread through every major hive complex, destroying the adaptive mechanisms that had made the swarm unstoppable. Admiral Bobby Chun stood in the council chambers on Alpha Centauri Station, addressing the assembled representatives from 47 different species. The massive circular room was silent except for the soft humming of translation devices, struggling to process the mix of relief and terror emanating from the alien delegates. The Kethver swarm has been neutralized, Chun reported, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's first galactic war. Their surviving ships are scattered across 300 star systems. Unable to coordinate attacks or share adaptive information, they are no longer a threat to Council space. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the aftermath of human warfare. Red zones that had marked Kethver-controlled territory were now scattered dots of isolated bioships, each one cut off from the network that had given them their strength. Some ships had reverted to basic survival behaviors, feeding on asteroids and avoiding contact with other vessels. Others had simply shut down, their biological systems unable to function without constant direction from their queens. Ambassador Veltar's crystalline form flickered with colors that human translators couldn't interpret. "How did you accomplish this?" he asked, his voice carrying notes of awe mixed with something that might have been fear. "Our combined fleets fought them for months without success." Colonel Steve Parker answered from his position near the tactical displays. "We didn't fight their ships, we fought their unity. The Kethver were dangerous because they worked together perfectly. Once we broke that coordination, they became just another biological species struggling to survive. But the methods you used, said General Vexmora, his 6 arms gesturing toward the data screens showing the viral weapons spread pattern. Biological warfare, psychological manipulation, infiltration of their command structure, these are not honorable tactics. General Marcus Webb's response would be recorded in council archives for future generations to study. Honor is a luxury that species can afford when they're not facing extinction. The Kethver were consuming the galaxy. We stopped them using every tool at our disposal. The alien commanders had spent weeks trying to understand human military doctrine, but they were only now beginning to grasp the full scope of what humanity had unleashed. The war had not been a series of battles between opposing forces, but rather a comprehensive campaign designed to destroy the enemy's ability to wage war at all. Dr. Lisa Morgan presented her final biological analysis to the council. The virus has permanently damaged their adaptive immune systems, she explained. Even if the scattered bioships somehow reunited, they would no longer be able to evolve countermeasures to new threats. They've been reduced to the level of ordinary biological organisms. Ordinary biological organisms that consume 17 star systems, observed Colonel Kexrun, his crystalline form showing patterns of deep concern. What happens to the survivors? That's up to the council, Admiral Chun replied. Some of the bioships are reverting to basic feeding behaviors and could potentially be contained on designated worlds. Others are showing signs of developing into non-aggressive forms. A few have simply died from system failures. The implications of human warfare were becoming clear to the alien representatives. Humanity had not just defeated the Kethver, they had fundamentally altered the nature of the species. The perfect biological weapons had been turned into scattered remnants of their former selves. President Andrew Collins addressed the galaxy from Earth, his words transmitted across subspace networks to every inhabited world. The Galactic Council asked for our help against an enemy that threatened all sentient life. We gave that help freely, using the methods that humanity has developed over 10,000 years of warfare. But we want the galaxy to understand something important, Collins continued. We didn't enjoy this war. We didn't celebrate the destruction of the Kethver. We did what was necessary to protect innocent lives, and we did it as efficiently as possible to minimize suffering on all sides. The aftermath of the war changed humanity's position in the galactic community forever. The Council offered Earth full membership with voting rights equal to the oldest species. Advanced technology sharing agreements provided humans with scientific knowledge that would accelerate their development by centuries. Territorial grants in the former Kethver zones gave humanity room to expand beyond their single star system, but perhaps more importantly, the alien species began treating humanity with a mixture of respect and caution that had never existed before. The enthusiastic newcomers who had seemed primitive and harmless were now recognized as the most effective military force the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Kate Sullivan's final report to the Joint Chiefs summarized the strategic implications. We've proven that human military doctrine can defeat any conventional threat. But we've also shown the galaxy what total war looks like when humans wage it. Future conflicts will be influenced by what we accomplished here. Dr. Morgan's research teams began studying the scattered Kethver bioships, not to develop new weapons, but to understand how biological systems could be rehabilitated after such comprehensive warfare. Some of the creatures showed signs of developing into peaceful species that could potentially be integrated into galactic society. Evolution doesn't just create weapons, Morgan explained to her research staff. It can also create solutions. Our job now is to help these organisms find a new evolutionary path that doesn't threaten other species. The human military forces began the long process of withdrawing from the war zones, but they left behind monitoring stations and research facilities that would track the Kethver survivors for decades to come. The galaxy had learned that humans didn't just win wars, they took responsibility for the aftermath. Colonel Frank Miller's final mission report contained a warning that would influence Council policy for generations. The Kethver were defeated because they relied too heavily on a single advantage. Any species that depends on one strength, no matter how powerful, can be countered by an enemy that thinks strategically about warfare. The Galactic Council established new military academies where alien officers could study human warfare doctrine, not to copy it, but to understand how to defend against it. The realization that warfare could be elevated to such a comprehensive level had profound implications for galactic security. Captain Nina Torres received the Medal of Galactic Service for her role in the intelligence operations that made victory possible. During the ceremony, she spoke words that would become famous throughout the galaxy. Humans don't fight wars to prove we're strong. We fight wars to protect what we care about. The galaxy asked us to care about them, and we did. But the most significant change was in how other species viewed the concept of warfare itself. The Kethver had been defeated not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the application of strategic thinking that treated war as a complex system to be understood and manipulated. The war was over, and humanity had won. Not just a military victory, but a place among the galaxy's most respected civilizations. They had asked for help against an adaptive enemy, and humanity had shown them that the most dangerous adaptation of all was the ability to think beyond conventional warfare and redefine what victory meant.